Hello and welcome to In the Workshop with me, Mark Tunnelly. And I'm going to have a chat today. Things are on my mind. And the chat I want to have is about 10-foot carp rods over 12-foot carp rods. Why are they being bought so much? Because they're very popular. And I sort of know why. Well, I don't know why. I have my thoughts why. And that's what I want to just sort of chat about, is why are people buying 10-foot carp rods, especially in the lower test curves of the 12 foots. In other words, 12-foot 2 3/4 should be an incredibly popular rod because it's very capable and does a large amount of things that the majority of us carp anglers are doing. But they're not popular. They're not popular at all. They're definitely not in the higher price bracket. They might be popular for beginners. But the moment you sort of get into the more serious side of things, and a 12-foot 2 3/4 is just never bought. I hardly ever sell them. Where your 12-foot 3.5s are sold all the time. I think, correctly or incorrectly, who knows, but I think the 12-foot 2 3/4 has been replaced by the 10-footer. Right, it's going to jump around a little bit, this thought process. And please do comment away down there and have your thoughts and says on the subject, because I think a lot of the purchases of 10-footers are psychological more than practical. But hey, what do I know? I'm not a psychiatrist or psychotherapist or whatever. Right, here we go. Bear with. Why would you have a 10-foot 3.25 pound rod over a 12-foot 2 3/4, where technically in this scenario you could say they're just as capable? They can both cast the same payload, the same distance. So why would you choose the 10-footer? Now, forget the obvious overhanging canopy and you just need a shorter rod. In that scenario, obvs. But otherwise, why not the 12-footer? The 12-footer is easier to time on the cast. It's got more spring to it, more feel, for want of a better term. But the 10-footer will outsell the 12-foot 2 3/4 all day long. So why is that then, when they're both just as the same capability? And I reckon it is down to the fact that lower test curve rods are considered to be specialist anglers rods, guys that aren't that serious. You're only catching single figure fish, pasties, that kind of stuff. And if you're a serious carper, you need to be using heavy test curves. And one of the most popular 10-footers out there is the 3.5. Now, I've built a good few, and they are stiff sticks. They're properly stiff little sticks. But people do love them. And I know you get a great sensation with the cast. Very staccato, very punchy, very accurate. But you're almost creating no bend in the play. So there has to be a psychological element that I'm only fishing a small water, I'm only fishing relatively close range. But because I'm a serious carper and I'm catching big fish or I'm targeting big fish, I have to use a heavy test curve. And if I was to use a 2 3/4, my mates would just rip the piss at me, excuse my French. And I can remember years and years ago, I was doing a lot of pike angling with a group up on Burfield, the famous Burfield, years ago. We're talking in the sort of mid to late 80s here, late 80s. And we were doing a lot of piking. And one of the group bought some 12-foot 2 3/4 carp rods. There were some Daiwa carp rods. And we ripped it out of him. You know, you can't be a bloody pike angler if you're using carp rods, etc., etc. And I will remember that to this day, about how important the psychological placement of a rod is to somebody's fishing, whether it's peer pressure or just how they feel themselves. Now, and I'm going off on a psychobabble tangent here, and I don't really know what I'm talking about, because I said I'm no psychiatrist and I've not done any studies into this. This is just my personal thoughts, because there doesn't seem to be any logical sense in having heavy test curve short rods over a lower test curve longer rod, assuming canopy would allow it. But they outsell them all day long. So again, as I said, thoughts, the reasons why you do it. But I would say there has to be a psychological element that I'm fishing just a pond, But I'm fishing for the big fish in there, you know, there's some 30s in there. I don't need to cast very far, it's only 50, 60 yards or whatever. So I definitely want a test curve, like 3¼ or 3½, or maybe even as low as 3. But I can't use a low test curve 12-foot, I'm going to have to go for the 10s. So I'm sure that that's an element. And also there's another thing as well, which plays right into my pocket, which is really, really nice, is it gives us an excuse to buy another set of rods. Right, I've got my 12-foot 3½s for my big water, my big distance. But some of the waters I'm fishing as well, they're small little lakes. Excuse me, I've got an itchy eye today, so I will be rubbing it quite a lot. I'm fishing these small waters, and it gives me an excuse to buy another set of rods. But instead of having a lower test curve, I'm just going to have the same test curve, but just shorter. Mini big pit reels on it, etc. So I've got my close range gear, or my small water gear, and I've got my big water gear. So, as I said, it's just going to be riffing, talking about this, because there doesn't seem to be any physics logic about buying heavy test curve short rods, assuming low canopy, and another caveat to that as well, boat work. I'm not doing any boat work. Now that, I'm going to jump into that one. Well, if you are fishing and you need a boat every now and again for weeded up stuff, and you are on a smaller pond and you can cast the payload the required distance with a 10-footer, then it makes great sense, because you can get straight in the boat and they're easier to use in those confined spaces, easier to use with a short handled net, etc., to land those fish and pull them out of the weed. So yeah, I see all sides. I see all sides. And I did a survey on Facebook some time ago, and asking people what length and test curve they came up with. And believe it or not, one of the most popular was 10-foot, 2¾ So I think, again, when people say, well, I do actually want a lighter test curve rod, but the 10-foot sort of gives you that excuse to have it, because you can definitely call them your pond rods, light enough and small enough. And then you can have 12-foot 3½s. So again, if I was having two sets of rods in as a straight up rule, I'd have a 12-foot 3½, 12-foot 3½, and a 10-foot 2¾ I'm sort of covered. But what does perplex me a little bit is the heavy test curves on these short rods. They don't seem to make a great deal of sense, because people will, and I'm sure people will comment and say, yeah, but I can bang my 10-foot 3½s 130 yards. So, sure, great. But you can do it a lot easier with the 12-foot version. So why put yourself, because I want. Yeah, each their own. Everybody's got their thoughts on this, and I am genuinely intrigued to find out. I've come to no conclusions apart from I think it is a little bit of psychology about it, where I have to use a heavy test curve rod to be a serious big fish fisherman. If I'm using, you know, low down, say like 2¼ I've got to be a 10 angler. You know, so there's going to be that sort of peer pressure-y type thing. And I have had conversation with customers who've come to me and they said, I'm going to buy some lightweight rods, but their mates have all told them that they should be buying these heavyweight rods. So I'm pretty sure there's a peer pressure-y, keeping up with the Joneses type, fitting in with the crowd attitude towards this as well. So yeah, please do comment away. I'm probably highly likely wrong. I don't care whether I'm wrong. I don't care whether I'm right. I'm just intrigued to find out why heavy test curve 10-footers are more popular than a lower test curve longer rod, which have the same casting capability, should we say. Not quite, because the heavy test curve short rod will cast a heavier payload for sure, but distance is achievable, you know, much the same. So yeah, thanks very much for watching and listening to me waffle on, and I'm going to have a quick sip of coffee, comment away, and enjoy your fishing. Thank you.